Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale inspires and captivates. Today, we bring you the story of Abigail and William, a union born from duty that transformed into an extraordinary journey of love, courage, and self-discovery, set against the majestic backdrop of Avalon Castle. This is a tale of ancient prophecies, dark curses, and the strength it takes to rewrite destiny. Through trials and triumphs, Abigail and William show us that even the darkest paths can lead to light. Subscribe to our channel to begin today's story. Your journey with Life Stories starts now. Let's dive in. The grand hall of Avalon Castle was alive with flickering candlelight. Hundreds of flames casting shadows that danced on the high, vaulted ceilings. The stained glass windows, intricate and ancient, filtered the soft amber glow of the late afternoon, creating a space that felt at once solemn and resplendent. It was a place built for moments like this, a royal wedding to seal the fate of kingdoms. At the center of the hall stood Prince William, heir to the Avalon throne. He was the picture of a noble ruler, standing tall and steady at the altar in ceremonial robes that mirrored the deep blue of the ocean. His expression was calm, unreadable to the gathered crowd, but I could see the weight in his eyes, a heaviness that only those born into power seemed to carry. He was a young man of 28, known throughout Avalon for his courage on the battlefield and his measured demeanor in the halls of governance. But today, even William's legendary composure seemed strained, his thoughts far from the ceremony about to unfold. This marriage had been planned for months, not out of love but necessity. Avalon and the neighboring state of Westhaven had been at odds for generations, their borders often tense with disputes. The union between Prince William and Princess Abigail of Westhaven was meant to change that. A strategic alliance to secure peace and power for both states. William had accepted this duty as he had every other responsibility in his life, with quiet determination. Even if it meant sacrificing his personal desires. He had barely met Abigail. The court's whispers about her painted a picture as murky as the fogs that often rolled through Avalon's cliffs. She was described as reclusive, always veiled during public appearances, and rumored to be less than attractive. To many, she was an enigma, and enigma bred suspicion. Even as the future queen, Abigail had done little to dissuade such rumors, seemingly content to let the veil she wore shield her from judgment. "Your Highness," came the quiet voice of Lord Martin, William's most trusted advisor, breaking through the charged silence. "She is coming." William's jaw tightened, but he simply nodded. He didn't expect love, not from this arrangement. He had resigned himself long ago to a life where passion was a luxury he could not afford. Yet, as the great oak doors to the hall slowly swung open, his stomach twisted with a pang of anxiety. Who was this woman who would share his life, his burdens, and his throne? He did not fear her appearance, but something about the mystery surrounding her unsettled him. The room collectively held its breath as Princess Abigail appeared. She entered gracefully, her gown a cascade of pristine white satin that shimmered with the movement of her steps. Her face, as expected, was hidden behind a delicate veil that, though beautiful, was thick enough to obscure her features. The murmurs began almost immediately, hushed whispers rippling through the gathered nobles like a wind stirring dry leaves. Abigail moved with a poise that silenced them. Her gait was calm, purposeful, and utterly unshaken by the scrutiny of the crowd. From where I stood, I could see William watching her approach, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. This was not the hesitant, self-conscious figure the rumors had promised. Abigail carried herself with an air of confidence that seemed to defy the room's expectations, and I could see how it both intrigued and unnerved the prince. The tension between them was palpable, a tightrope stretched taut by years of tradition, duty, and unspoken fears. When Abigail reached the altar, she did not flinch or falter. She stood beside William, her hands folded demurely but her posture unwavering. William glanced at her, his expression softening for the briefest moment before his mask of stoicism returned. The ceremony began. The Archbishop's deep voice echoing through the hall as he recited the ancient vows meant to bind their fates. But I could tell that William's mind was elsewhere, caught up in the presence of this enigmatic woman. Finally, the pivotal moment arrived. The Archbishop turned to Abigail and spoke the words everyone had been waiting for, "Princess Abigail. It is time to remove the veil and reveal your face to your prince and the kingdom." The air seemed to thicken, the room descending into an almost oppressive silence. All eyes were on her. I could feel the anticipation crackling in the room like a storm waiting to break. Abigail, unfazed by the weight of the moment, reached up with steady hands and grasped the edges of her veil. The fabric lifted slowly, and as it fell away, a collective gasp swept through the hall. The whispers died in their throats. Abigail's face, far from the rumors of deformity or plainness, was strikingly beautiful, but not in the conventional sense. Her features held a unique, almost unearthly quality, a balance of strength and delicacy that commanded attention. Her deep-set eyes glimmered with intelligence, as though they carried the wisdom of a life far beyond her years. Her lips curved into a subtle, enigmatic smile, one that seemed to both invite and defy understanding. William stood frozen, his carefully maintained composure fracturing. It was clear he hadn't expected this. Whatever he had prepared himself for, it wasn't Abigail. Her gaze met his directly, unflinching, almost as if she were studying him. There was no shyness in her expression, no trace of the fear or self-doubt that might have been expected. Instead, she stood as an equal, a woman who seemed acutely aware that this moment marked the beginning of something far greater than the simple union of two states. The ceremony continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just the nobles or the commoners who were captivated. William, too, seemed shaken. He recited his vows with the precision of a man who had memorized them well. But his mind was clearly on the woman at his side. For the first time in his life, perhaps, he was faced with someone who wasn't part of the carefully controlled world he had built for himself. Abigail represented a new kind of challenge, one he didn't know how to navigate. When the final blessing was given and the ceremony concluded, William led Abigail out of the hall and toward the reception. The crowd followed, murmuring in subdued tones, their curiosity about the mysterious princess only deepening. At the banquet, Abigail's calm, commanding presence continued to draw every eye. Even as she walked beside William, it was as though she moved in her own world, untouched by the judgment or speculation that surrounded her. As they stood together in the grand reception hall, William seemed at a loss. He glanced at Abigail, unsure of what to say or how to proceed. It was she who broke the silence. "You seem surprised, Your Highness," she said softly, her voice carrying a subtle warmth but also a playful edge. William blinked, caught off guard. They said different things," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't expect." Abigail's smile widened slightly, though she showed no sign of offense. "Rumors have a life of their own, Prince William. I've never cared much for what they say." Her words intrigued him. He studied her carefully, his expression softening as he realized that the woman before him was far more complex than he had imagined. She wasn't just a princess or a symbol of political union. She was something altogether different, a force unto herself. For the first time, William felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, hope. Not for love, necessarily, but for something real. Something that could transform the burdens of duty into a shared partnership. Little did he know, the path ahead would be more complicated than either of them could have foreseen. The reception hall buzzed with soft music and the subdued chatter of guests who danced around their curiosity about Princess Abigail. Plates of delicately prepared dishes and goblets of wine made their rounds. But it was clear that the true feast for the court tonight was the mystery of the new princess. William stood beside Abigail, still trying to gather his thoughts. His wife had shattered his expectations. and he found himself unsure of how to proceed. He was a man of action, used to commanding armies, negotiating treaties, and resolving disputes with logic and precision. But this woman, who had so confidently walked into his life, seemed to undo all his careful calculations. Abigail was neither the frail and submissive bride he had expected, nor the timid figure the court's rumors had painted. She was something altogether different, unshakable, enigmatic, and entirely beyond his control. "You're unusually quiet, Your Highness," Abigail said, breaking the silence between them. Her tone was calm, almost teasing, but not unkind. She seemed completely at ease, even as the eyes of half the room lingered on her. William's brow furrowed. He had been so consumed by his own thoughts that her words caught him off guard. "I suppose I didn't expect," he paused, searching for the right words. "I didn't expect to be so surprised." Abigail tilted her head slightly, a glimmer of amusement in her expression. "Surprised by what? Exactly?" "That I am not the shadowy figure the rumors promised." William's face warmed, though he maintained his composure. "Perhaps. You've given me much to reconsider in just a few hours." Her soft laugh was almost musical, but it carried an undercurrent of knowing. "I've found that people often prefer the myths they create to the truths they must face. It's easier to believe in whispers and veils than to confront what lies behind them." He regarded her carefully, his intrigue deepening. "And what lies behind yours, Princess? You seem so at ease in this chaos. Yet, I cannot shake the feeling that there is much more to you than you reveal." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet intensity. "Perhaps that is something you will have to discover for yourself, William." It was the first time she had used his name, and it struck him as intimate, though she spoke it without hesitation. He opened his mouth to respond but was interrupted by a courtier who approached with a bow and a request for his attention. Reluctantly, William stepped away, leaving Abigail to mingle with the guests. As the days passed, it became clear to William that Abigail was not a woman who would simply fade into the background of royal life. She joined him at council meetings, where she listened intently, her sharp mind quickly picking up on the complexities of Avalon's politics. When she spoke, it was with precision and insight that startled even the most seasoned advisors. At first, her presence in these meetings was met with skepticism. Some of the council members, particularly the older ones, were reluctant to take her seriously, but Abigail was undeterred. She answered their challenges with reason and poise, her tone never wavering. Gradually, even the most doubtful began to acknowledge her intelligence. William observed her closely during these moments. Each time she deftly handled a difficult question or offered a fresh perspective, he felt a surge of both admiration and unease. Abigail was unlike anyone he had ever known. She didn't fit neatly into the mold of a traditional princess, and that unsettled him. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't deny that she was making an impression on him and on Avalon. Their interactions, both in and out of council, began to take on a rhythm. At meals, they spoke more freely, their conversations ranging from politics to philosophy, even to shared memories of their childhoods in different states. Abigail's candor surprised him. She spoke openly of her experiences growing up in West Haven, where expectations for a princess had been stifling. They wanted someone soft, malleable, she said one evening, as they dined alone in the grand dining hall. But I was not that. My father taught me to read diplomacy the way others read poetry. My mother taught me strength. It wasn't what they expected, but it was what I needed. William studied her face, illuminated by the golden glow of the candelabras. And the veil? Was that your way of defying those expectations? She hesitated, her gaze falling to the goblet in her hand. Not defiance. Protection. The veil became a way to keep their judgments at bay. If they couldn't see me, they couldn't define me. Her answer lingered with him long after the conversation ended. It was not long before William began to realize how deeply Abigail had unsettled the careful balance of his life. He had always seen himself as a man of control, someone who could navigate any situation with measured precision. But Abigail challenged that control. She was independent in thought and action, never seeking his approval yet somehow earning his respect with every passing day. For her part, Abigail seemed equally perplexed by William. She had expected to find in him a rigid ruler, a man blinded by duty. But what she saw was more nuanced, a man who carried the weight of expectation but longed, in some quiet part of himself, for freedom from it. One evening, after a particularly heated council meeting in which Abigail had clashed with a prominent advisor, William confronted her. They stood in the library, the room quiet save for the crackle of the fire in the hearth. "You're not at all what I expected, Abigail," he said, his voice thick with frustration. "I thought this marriage would be simple, a formality. But you make it complicated." She raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his tone. "And what did you expect? A silent partner? A decorative princess willing to nod and smile at whatever you or your advisors decided?" "I didn't know what to expect," he admitted, his voice softening. "But I didn't expect you." Her expression softened. And for the first time, William saw a vulnerability in her eyes. "William, I came here for more than just this alliance. I came to be your partner. But that only works if you're willing to see me for who I truly am." Her words struck something deep within him. For all his frustration, he couldn't deny the truth in them. Abigail wasn't an obstacle, she was an opportunity. An opportunity to build something real. Something far greater than the sum of their duties. For the first time since their wedding, William felt a glimmer of hope not just for their kingdoms, but for themselves. Together, they could forge a partnership unlike any other. But only if he was willing to meet her as an equal. And in that moment, he decided he would try. In the days that followed their growing understanding, life at Avalon Castle settled into a rhythm that belied the undercurrent of unease lurking just beneath the surface. Abigail's intelligence and poise began to win the respect of many at court. But whispers about her veiled past and the alliance with Westhaven refused to die. Rumors swirled like restless phantoms, creeping through the corridors of the castle and the villages beyond its gates. Some whispered of curses, others of a dark fate tied to the princess's arrival. It was during one of their increasingly candid conversations that Abigail revealed the truth, a secret that had shaped her life and now cast its shadow over their marriage. They sat in the castle's study late one evening, the faint glow of candlelight lending a warmth to the dark-paneled room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, but the air between them was heavy with unspoken words. "William," Abigail began, her voice measured but carrying a vulnerability he had not heard before. "There is something you need to know about why this marriage was arranged. Something my parents kept hidden from everyone." He watched her intently, sensing the weight of her words. "Go on." She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of the goblet in her hand. "When I was born, there was a prophecy in Westhaven. An ancient tale, older than our kingdom itself, that foretold the birth of a princess who would bring either salvation or destruction. A child born under a rare alignment of the stars, marked by both destiny and doom." William leaned forward, his brows furrowed in confusion. "A prophecy? Abigail, are you saying your parents believed in such tales?" Her lips curved into a sad smile. "Not just my parents. The whole of Westhaven. When I was born under that alignment, the court saw it as both a blessing and a curse. They revered me and feared me in equal measure. My mother loved me, but I could see the fear in her eyes. My father tried to shield me, but even he could not deny what the prophecy meant to them." "And what exactly did this prophecy say?" he asked, his voice careful. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. It claimed that the princess born under those stars would one day face a choice that would determine the fate of her kingdom. Destruction or salvation. It was vague, as these things often are, but it was enough to shape my entire life. William sat back, struggling to absorb what she was telling him. He had spent his life grounded in strategy and logic, relying on what he could see and control. To hear that his wife's life had been shaped by something so intangible, so mystical, was difficult to comprehend. "So that's why you always wore the veil," he said quietly. "To hide from their judgment." "Yes," she replied, her voice tinged with sorrow. "It was easier to let them see what they wanted, a mystery, a myth, than to let them project their fears onto me. And when this marriage was proposed, my parents saw it as a way to avoid the prophecy entirely. If I left West Haven, they thought the curse, or fate, or whatever it was, might be averted." William frowned. "Do you believe it?" Abigail paused, her expression contemplative. "I don't know. I've spent my life running from it, hiding from it. But now, standing here, I can't help but wonder if it's real. And if it is, what that means for Avalon." The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord in him. For all her strength and poise, she carried a burden far heavier than he had imagined. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "You don't have to carry this alone, Abigail. Whatever this prophecy is, whatever choice you may face, we'll face it together." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the tension between them dissolved. "Thank you, William. But I fear this is something that cannot be shared. When the time comes, it will be my decision alone." Despite their newfound understanding, the rumors of the prophecy began to seep into Avalon's court. It started with hushed conversations among the nobles and gradually spread to the servants and soldiers. Whispers of curses and fated destruction grew louder, fueled by the arrival of strange omens: a black crow perched on the castle walls, an unseasonable frost that killed crops in the lowlands, and eerie dreams reported by many in the village. The unease culminated during a council meeting one cold morning. William and Abigail sat at the head of the long table, flanked by the kingdom's most trusted advisers. Lord Henry, an elder statesman with a penchant for dramatics, cleared his throat and spoke with calculated gravity. "Your Highness, there is unrest among the people," he began, addressing William but glancing warily at Abigail. "The tales of a curse tied to West Haven have taken root. Superstition spreads faster than fire, and the people grow uneasy with every passing day." William's jaw tightened, but it was Abigail who responded first. "And what would you have us do, Lord Henry? Bend to fear and whispers? Allow myth to dictate our actions?" Her tone was sharp but composed, her gaze meeting his without flinching. Lord Henry shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. "Princess Abigail, with respect, the stability of Avalon depends on the trust of its people. If they believe a curse threatens the kingdom, it is our duty to address their concerns." William cut in, his voice firm. "We will not validate baseless rumors. Lord Henry, this council has more pressing matters than to entertain superstition." The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Abigail's expression remained calm, but William could see the frustration simmering beneath her composed exterior. After the meeting, as they walked back to their chambers, she turned to him. "They will never trust me," she said softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "No matter what I do, I will always be the princess they fear." William stopped, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Then we will prove them wrong, Abigail. Together." She met his gaze, a flicker of hope mingling with her doubt. "I hope you're right, William, because I fear the prophecy has already begun." Unbeknownst to them, a dark mist was beginning to form in the distant village of Silver Hollow, a shadow that would soon bring the prophecy to Avalon's gates. The village of Silver Hollow was nestled in a quiet valley on the outskirts of Avalon's vast territories, known for its fertile lands and peaceful existence. It had long been a haven for farmers and craftsmen. But when the dark fog came, that peace was shattered. At first, it was a mere shadow on the horizon, barely noticeable against the misty mornings. By midday, the fog had crept closer, an unnatural thickness that obscured the sun and swallowed the land in silence. By nightfall, it had fully descended, smothering the village in an oppressive gloom. Crops withered almost instantly, their vibrant greens fading to brittle brown, and livestock grew sick, their mournful cries echoing through the still air. The villagers, once skeptical of superstitions, now whispered in fear. They spoke of curses, of a darkness that could only mean doom, and of Princess Abigail, the foreign bride who had brought the prophecy of Westhaven to Avalon. News of the fog reached the castle by dawn. William was in the council chamber, discussing troop movements along Avalon's eastern border, when a messenger arrived. Breathless and pale, the young man's voice trembled as he recounted the tale. "A shadow, Your Highness. It moves through the valley," he stammered. "The crops are dead. The animals sick. The villagers, they fear it's the curse." The room fell into an uneasy silence. Even the most practical among the advisers shifted in their seats, their expressions betraying their discomfort. William's gaze hardened as he stood, his commanding presence filling the chamber. "Prepare my horse," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "We ride to Silver Hollow immediately." "William, wait." Abigail's voice cut through the murmurs of the council. She had been sitting quietly at his side, her composed demeanor a stark contrast to the rising tension in the room. Now, she stood, her expression resolute. "If this is tied to the prophecy, I must go with you." William hesitated, his protective instincts warring with the understanding that she was right. If the rumors were true, if this fog was connected to the prophecy, then Abigail's presence might be the key to understanding what they faced. "No," he said finally, his tone brooking no argument. "It's dangerous. I won't risk you." Abigail stepped closer, her voice low but unwavering. "And I won't sit idly by while this unfolds. William, this is my burden as much as it is yours. Perhaps more." Her words struck a chord, and he saw the determination in her eyes, the same strength that had drawn him to her since their first meeting. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Very well. But stay close to me." The journey to Silver Hollow was swift but heavy with apprehension. The closer they drew to the village, the darker the sky grew, as though the very air rebelled against the light. By the time they reached the outskirts, the fog was so dense that it seemed to swallow sound and color, leaving only a heavy, oppressive silence. The scene that greeted them was one of devastation. Once thriving fields lay barren, their crops reduced to lifeless husks. The villagers huddled in small groups, their faces pale and etched with fear. Even the animals, usually a comforting presence, were eerily quiet, their movements sluggish and strained. William dismounted, scanning the area with a practiced eye. "Where did it begin?" he asked one of the villagers, an older man whose weathered face was drawn with worry. "The forest," the man replied, his voice barely a whisper. "It came from the forest." William turned to Abigail, who had just dismounted with the help of a guard. Her expression was grave, her gaze fixed on the ominous tree line in the distance. "We should investigate," she said softly, but there was no hesitation in her tone. Together, they ventured toward the edge of the forest, flanked by a small contingent of guards. The fog thickened as they approached, clinging to their clothes and muffling their footsteps. The air grew colder, and an unnatural stillness settled around them, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. Abigail paused, her fingers brushing against the brittle grass beneath her feet. She knelt, her hand resting on the earth, and closed her eyes. For a moment, she remained still, as if listening to something only she could hear. "What is it?" William asked, his voice low. "There's something here," she murmured, her brow furrowing. "Something, alive. It's as if the ground itself is resonating with a force I cannot explain." Before William could respond, a low, almost imperceptible whisper rose from the depths of the forest. It was faint, carried on the cold wind, but it sent a shiver down their spines. Abigail's eyes widened, her hand tightening around William's arm. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He nodded. His jaw clenched. "Stay close." The whisper grew louder. A haunting, disembodied voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It spoke no words, but its tone was dark and foreboding. A sound that seemed to pierce straight to the soul. One of the guards stepped forward, his sword drawn. "What is this sorcery?" he muttered, his voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the fog began to shift, swirling into unnatural patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Abigail's heart pounded as she felt a strange pull, an invisible thread tugging at her very being. "William," she said urgently, her voice trembling despite her resolve. "This is no ordinary fog. It's connected to the prophecy. I can feel it." He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his grip firm. "We'll face it together." As the fog thickened around them, the villagers watching from a distance began to murmur, their fear palpable. Abigail knew that whatever was happening, it was only the beginning. The curse of Westhaven had come to Avalon, and it would not be ignored. Standing at the edge of the forest, with the whispers growing louder and the fog closing in, Abigail felt the weight of the prophecy more acutely than ever. The choice she had feared all her life was approaching, and the fate of both kingdoms hung in the balance. The eerie whispers followed them back to Avalon Castle, clinging to Abigail like an echo that refused to fade. Though the fog at Silver Hollow had not spread further that day, its presence left a mark on everyone who had witnessed it. Villagers whispered in hushed tones about the curse. Soldiers stood more vigilant at their posts, and the nobles at court found new fuel for their fears. Abigail, however, remained silent. The whispers from the forest haunted her thoughts, a dissonant melody that played over and over in her mind. She had felt it, the pull of something ancient and powerful, something tied to her very existence. William, ever watchful, noticed the change in her demeanor as they returned to the castle. Though she held her head high, the weight of the prophecy seemed to press down on her shoulders, making her movements heavier and her silences longer. That night, in the dim glow of their chambers, William finally confronted her. "Abigail," he began, his voice gentle but firm, "what did you feel out there, in the forest?" She stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the moonlit grounds below. For a long moment, she said nothing, and William wondered if she would answer at all. Then, with a deep sigh, she turned to face him. "I felt the prophecy," she said softly, her words heavy with meaning. "It's not just a tale, William. It's real. I could feel it in the air, in the earth beneath my hands. It's alive." He took a step closer, his expression a mixture of concern and determination. "Alive? Abigail, what are you saying?" "I don't fully understand it myself," she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield against the chill that crept into the room. "But I know this, the curse isn't just a shadow or a fear. It's a force, a power that has been waiting, biding its time. And now, it's here." William's jaw tightened, and he placed a hand on her arm. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever it is, we'll find a way to stop it." She shook her head, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You don't understand, William. This isn't something you can fight with a sword or outmaneuver in council. This is about me. The prophecy has always been about me." Before he could respond, a loud knock echoed through the room, followed by the urgent voice of a guard. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but there's an urgent matter in the Great Hall." William exchanged a quick glance with Abigail before striding to the door and throwing it open. The guard's face was pale, his voice trembling. "A figure has appeared, Your Highness. In the hall. It demands to speak with Princess Abigail." The Great Hall was silent as they entered, its usual grandeur overshadowed by an oppressive sense of foreboding. The court stood in hushed clusters along the edges of the room, their eyes fixed on the figure at its center. Draped in a dark, hooded cloak, the figure seemed to draw the shadows toward itself, an otherworldly presence that made the air feel heavy and cold. Abigail's breath hitched as she stepped closer. William at her side. The figure turned its head slightly, and though its face was obscured, its voice rang out, deep and resonant, as if it came from everywhere at once. Princess Abigail of West Haven, it intoned, its words laden with authority and menace. The time has come. William stepped forward, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. Who are you? What is this? The figure ignored him. Its unseen gaze locked on Abigail. You know who I am. Child of the prophecy, it said. I am the bearer of fate. The voice of the curse that has followed you since your birth. Abigail stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of this moment, feared it, yet never truly believed it would come to pass. Why now? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Why reveal yourself now? Because the choice must be made, the figure replied. The balance of the kingdoms hangs by a thread, and only you can tip the scales. Destruction or salvation, this is your destiny. William stepped between them, his voice rising with anger. She will not be coerced by riddles and fear. Whatever this choice is, we will face it together. The figure laughed. A hollow, chilling sound. You cannot shield her from this. Prince of Avalon. The choice is hers alone. It raised a shadowy hand, and the air around them seemed to ripple. Two paths lie before you. Abigail, it said. Destruction, sacrifice the kingdom to end the curse. Salvation, take the curse into yourself and save the kingdom. But at the cost of your own essence. Choose. The weight of the figure's words fell like a hammer, and the hall seemed to hold its breath. Abigail felt the eyes of the court on her, felt the enormity of the moment pressing down on her chest. She turned to William, his face tight with worry but filled with steadfast determination. You don't have to do this, he said softly, his voice breaking through the heavy silence. We can find another way. Her heart ached at his words, at the love and fear she saw in his eyes. But deep down, she knew there was no other way. The choice had always been hers, and now, it had come to claim her. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped forward, meeting the figure's shadowed gaze. I choose salvation, she said, her voice clear and unwavering. But I will not lose myself. I will face the curse and overcome it on my terms. The figure tilted its head, as if surprised by her answer. So be it, it said. And with a sudden gust of wind, it vanished, leaving the hall in stunned silence. Abigail staggered, the weight of her decision sinking in. William caught her, his arms steady around her. You were incredible, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. We'll face whatever comes next together. And for the first time, she truly believed it. But deep down, she knew the battle was only beginning. The castle was quiet in the early hours of the morning, but the silence was anything but peaceful. A tension lingered in the air, heavy and unrelenting, as though the walls themselves were bracing for what was to come. Outside, the dark fog that had once clung to Silver Hollow now crept ever closer to Avalon Castle. It was no longer an abstract threat, it was real, alive, and relentless. Abigail sat in her chambers, staring into the small fire burning in the hearth. Its flickering light cast shifting shadows on the stone walls, but it did little to warm her. She was cold, not from the chill of the room, but from the weight of the choice she had made. Salvation. It sounded noble, heroic even. But the cost, that was what haunted her now. She felt William's presence before she heard his footsteps. He entered quietly, as though afraid to break the fragile stillness of the room. Abigail, he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that only he could bring. How are you feeling? She turned to him, offering a small, weary smile, as well as one can feel when their destiny looms like a storm cloud over their head. He crossed the room and sat beside her, taking her hand in his. His touch was steady, grounding her in a way nothing else could. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. "Whatever this curse is, we'll face it together." Abigail's heart ached at his words, at the sincerity in his eyes. "William," she began, her voice faltering. "I don't know what will happen," the figure said I'd have to take the curse into myself. "I don't know what that means. I don't know if I'll still be me." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You will always be you, Abigail. No curse, no prophecy can take that from you. And I will be here, no matter what." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. His faith in her, unwavering and absolute, was the only thing keeping her from crumbling. By midday, the fog had reached the castle gates. The once vibrant gardens were now withered and lifeless, the trees stripped bare as though winter had arrived overnight. The guards stood at the ready, though their weapons felt futile against an enemy they could not see or touch. Whispers of fear filled the castle halls, and even the bravest nobles found themselves retreating into the safety of their chambers. Abigail, however, stood in the great hall, waiting. William stood beside her, his sword at his side, though they both knew it was useless against what was coming. The air was thick, oppressive, as though the castle itself was holding its breath. And then, as if summoned by her resolve, the figure appeared once more. It materialized from the fog like a shadow given form, its hooded cloak billowing as though moved by an unseen wind. The court recoiled, their fear palpable. But Abigail stood firm, her hands clenched at her sides. But her voice was steady as she spoke. "I am here," she said, her words cutting through the tense silence. "I have made my choice." The figure tilted its head, its unseen gaze fixed on her. "Indeed you have," it replied, its voice resonating like the toll of a distant bell. "But choices have consequences. Princess, are you ready to bear them?" Abigail swallowed hard but nodded. "I am." With a slow, deliberate motion, the figure raised its hand. The fog around it began to shift, coiling like tendrils of smoke before surging toward Abigail. Gasps echoed through the hall as the dark mist enveloped her, swallowing her whole. "Abigail!" William's voice rang out, filled with panic. But she held up a hand to stop him. "No, William," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is mine to face." The mist swirled around her, cold and suffocating, but she did not flinch. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached deep within herself, searching for the strength she knew she would need. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling her mind with words she could not understand. Fear threatened to consume her, but she held on to William's voice, his presence, his love. "You are stronger than this," she told herself. "You are not the curse. You are not its victim. You are its master." The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of chaos. But then, with a sudden burst of light, they were gone. The fog dissipated, retreating as though banished by an unseen force. The great hall fell silent once more, and Abigail stood alone, her body trembling but unbroken. William was the first to reach her, pulling her into his arms. "Abigail," he breathed, his voice filled with relief. "You're all right." She nodded, though she felt anything but. "It's gone," she said softly. "The curse, it's gone." The court erupted into murmurs, their fear giving way to awe. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and Avalon was safe once more. But as Abigail looked into William's eyes, she knew the battle had left its mark. She could feel the curse's lingering presence within her, a shadow she would carry for the rest of her life. But it was her shadow now, and she would not let it define her. In the days that followed, life at Avalon Castle began to return to normal. The fog was gone, the crops began to recover, and the whispers of the curse faded into memory. Abigail, however, knew that her journey was far from over. She had faced the prophecy and emerged victorious. But the burden of that victory was hers alone to bear. William remained by her side, his unwavering support a constant source of strength. Together, they began to rebuild not just the trust of the court, but their own partnership. What had started as a union of duty had become something far deeper, a bond forged in the fires of trial and tempered by love. And though the future remained uncertain, Abigail knew one thing for certain: she was no longer the veiled princess of Westhaven. She was Abigail, Queen of Avalon, and she would face whatever came next with courage, strength, and the love of the man who had stood beside her through it all. As the sun rose over Avalon Castle, its golden light washing away the shadows of the past, Abigail and William stood together on the balcony overlooking the kingdom they had saved. The prophecy was no longer a burden, it was a chapter closed, replaced by a future they would shape together. Abigail, once veiled in mystery, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. She carried the scars of her journey, but they were badges of honor, reminders of the courage it took to face the unknown. By her side, William stood as a steadfast partner, their bond unbreakable and their love undeniable. The people of Avalon began to see their queen not as a figure of fear, but as a beacon of hope. Together, Abigail and William vowed to lead with wisdom and compassion, proving that even the darkest prophecies could be rewritten. This was not just the end of their story, it was the beginning of a legacy. Thank you for being part of this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of courage, love, and the triumph of the human spirit. Stay tuned for our next video. Your next story awaits.